Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar on physician compensation. We're going to discuss a little bit about how to utilize dashboarding and analytics, especially if you're implementing or designing new compensation plans. My name is Scott Everett. I'm the Vice President of Analytics Solutions with PDS, and I'm joined today by Becky Cook, a phenomenal executive consultant, many years in the industry. Because when you talk about analytics nowadays, visualization is really the big trend that's out there with all of the analytical tools that you see. Now, let's take a quick look at a visualization around physician compensation. This is the reason why visualization is becoming key, because visualization tools have become more accessible, easier for clients to obtain, and really if you look at it, they're very easy to use. They give you interactability and make it easy to quickly and easily slice and dice through the data that you see. You can apply filters, you can very easily identify outliers, particularly in this area where you may have some providers. This is a work RVU to salary ratio, where you can see some providers who may be very undercompensated for the high productivity that they provide. And similarly, you may see some more providers, outliers, who may be more highly compensated but are lower productivity. And each is a problem that needs addressing in a different way. But just having this data available and more accessible is the reason why these visualization tools are really becoming more heavily used within the industry. Now, this is a fairly simple compensation plan that may be based upon work RVUs or collections, but the changes in the healthcare industry right now are really making it so that a lot of practices are modifying their compensation plans around the way they're going to be reimbursed. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Becky to talk a little bit about, at a high level, some of these changes that are occurring in the industry and how that is impacting how practices design and implement compensation plans.
Thank you, Scott. Certainly with the implementation in 2017 of MACRA, MIP, continuing flourishing of ACOs and shared savings programs, more organizations are updating their compensation plans. Their goal is to try and improve the alignment between physicians and their contract goals. In doing so, they are having to incorporate many of the concepts from the contracts into their compensation plan. So what we're going to talk today about is how we deal with calculation and reporting challenges, what we can use for benchmarks for physicians. What we really see as the biggest challenges here are bringing all this necessary data together to assure the physicians that their comp is accurate and fair. We're also going to be looking at analytics and visualization of data and show effective ways to use them, as well as to produce dashboards to meet our compensation challenges.
Thanks, Becky. Before we get into these topics, I'd really like to get a gauge of our audience here, and if you could take a minute to take a quick survey. What we're trying to see and understand is, are you in the process right now of designing a new compensation plan? And if so, are you making major changes or minor changes, or are you just not even considering changes to the compensation plans that you're on right now? So if you could just take a second. Well, let's go ahead and see the results. Well, yep, that's what we're seeing. It looks like over 80% of the people on this webinar right now are in the process of making changes, and over half of the people on the call are making major changes to their compensation plan. And really, that's not incredibly surprising. It's definitely something that we hear. I want to talk a little bit about right now what we hear from our clients, from prospective clients, what they think about compensation as it stands right now. And really a lot of it, it's really complex. It combines a lot of data from different places. That some of it they may not even know how to access. It's a very manual process. It may require a lot of different people, analysts who are putting this information together and doing it in a way that's very difficult, with doing calculations, checking for errors, and really nobody's managing the communication aspect of that. So really compensation is something that's fairly difficult. And it's going to become more difficult right now because we have to add some some different layers to it. So Becky, why don't you address now some of the changes in the industry that are really driving compensation plans today?
Well, it's really a gigantic jigsaw puzzle trying to put all this data together and to figure out how to make it tell a picture to the physician and represent what they want to see. What we see are lots of measures or metrics that are not related to productivity in any way, such as care coordination payments that are based on a per member per month payment, or clinical quality bonuses that are paid on group activity, such as hitting prescription targets for utilization of generics, utilization of preventive care. We see physicians themselves who are using care teams made up of 2 or more physicians, nurse practitioners, and their medical assistants to provide care for the patients so that they can keep their patient satisfaction scores very high. Schedule fill goals is very important to the insurance companies because they want to see that there is access for their patients. And one of the newer measures that we're seeing a lot of activity on is patient acuity risk scoring, where the insurance companies are risk adjusting the results of shared savings programs, similar to the Medicare MSSP plans, where they want to pay physicians more for caring for sicker patients and less for caring for patients who are not as acutely ill. So in order for these plans to be successful, they need to be able to provide both organization and individual physician information. Scott, can you help us understand how some of that can happen?
Yeah, so I'm hearing a lot of this in the industry as well. As we start looking at more of these quality goals, compensation plans need to start adopting those organizational culture and goals that we've always stated we've had from the very beginning, because those things that we've always considered non-monetary contributions are about to become monetary contributions. Things like patient satisfaction, things like patient access and scheduling, looking at quality incentives and really the overall patient experience is something that's going to be rewarded with the reimbursement from the payer. And so it would seem that a successful plan would align the provider's incentives along with those same goals. And we need to create a pathway where we can see the very end, but then we have to take steps to make that transition easier and more manageable as change is difficult to manage within any other organization.
So I agree, Scott. I think one of the things that I see on that slide was balanced scorecard. The importance of being able to drive change with some type of a report for the physician that shows those non-monetary contributions where there's no direct payment but an indirect payment is very important. Some of the other tools that I use to drive change include things like external benchmarking, adding context to reports. So many times I see comp reports that are all numbers, and the physicians don't always understand how to interpret some of those numbers. So adding context to reports through explanations, glossaries, or graphs is very helpful. I see a lot of emphasis on comparison to peers, and one that I really like is self-management. And that's giving the physicians options on how do they want to improve their comp, or don't they want to improve their comp? How do they want to manage their practice? But overall, the physicians have to be able to quickly navigate any new plan, and that means it needs to be simple for them to use and understand, even though the plan itself may be complex.
I think something like this, to take the complexity of the plan, we really need to, the way to simplify it is to utilize best practice analytics technologies that are out there. And really you want to be able to automate it as much as possible. Automation does several key things. The biggest in my mind is it really reduces the opportunity for errors in calculation. If the calculations are being done behind the scenes with these technological tools, then it really reduces the probability of human error that may exist when you're trying to do things more manually. In addition to this, you can create some intelligent metrics to calculate it. You can have fewer people working on it, or at least working on accessing the data and copying and pasting and checking and verifying everything, it can really drive down the amount of people who are doing the analysis and really put those people more to work in communicating and figuring out the best plan that's available that's going to make everybody a big winner in the end. So with that, I'd really like to get another survey from you again as well and really understand what's out there. Are you guys doing automated physician compensation reporting, communications, etc., or is it really more of a manual process in your organization? And if you could just take a second to let us know how manual is this process or how automated is this process within your organization? Really interesting that it is a very manual process most places right now, and a lot of that is just because the technology really is newer and a lot of people haven't brought it in, and a lot of people really want those additional eyes looking on it, you know, when it is a manual process, but also because it's very difficult to do. Let's take a look at what the process really is a lot of time for managing and modeling this physician compensation. Right now, even, it may be difficult because you have to take data from different sources, whether you have to take your productivity from your billing system, you have to take your conversion factors from a payroll or budgeting system, you may have quality or clinical profitability goals that have to be pulled from the EHR or from the general ledger system, and those all have to be staged or modeled in a relational database. And keeping everything relational when it comes from a disparate sources can be something that's a very time-consuming and difficult process that requires a lot of expertise to do. But that relational database is really key in order to provide the best analytics and dashboards that are possible in order to most effectively communicate, here's how this compensation plan is working and here's what's required. Well, let's talk about some additional complexities that go into building a data mart like this. Usually stuff like that can be brought in and you can have a data mart, but there's always exceptions. You may have different levels of compensation. It may be specialty based, it may be tenure, longevity based, or based upon some sort of academic standing as well. You may have quality metrics that are there, and I've never seen a plan in all my years that didn't have some one-off exception sitting there somewhere. All of these make it difficult to have some sort of standards in the data modeling and communication that's out there. So you really have to balance that with what the overall goal is and understanding what we're trying to achieve with the compensation plan that we're using.
So Scott, I'm going to remind you that even with all this complexity, the basic goals of the comp plan haven't changed. We have to be able to calculate compensation accurately and consistently. Can't have errors from one month to the next or have trend numbers that change. We need to be able to provide timely and transparent information to the physicians. They have to be able to understand their compensation plan if you want it to be successful. They need to understand the success factors and gaps so that they can maneuver their way through the comp plan. And we need frequent and clear communication of the plan and how much the physicians are going to earn. Without those, you're just not going to get a good acceptance of the compensation.
So I think utilizing some of these analytical tools can really help with this. And here's an example of a quick business intelligence report that can be created that shows the different variables that are involved in the compensation plan and the calculations that may exist in that. And you can go through and again, apply filters. You can slice and dice through the data, and you can stratify different levels that are out there. And this is definitely something that can be created in most business intelligence tools that are available. Is this something that you're thinking would work for what you're trying to accomplish, Becky?
Definitely. I can see how this would be helpful. This looks like it's fairly quick to maneuver my way through it and see the results of the compensation plan to calculate comp. The only difficulty I see is that trying to engage physicians with a table like this and print out a report form line by line is just not engaging. When I think about engaging physician in comp plan changes, I need to be able to show them at least a handful of items, and that's always actual and projected productivity results whether it's based on RVUs or some type of non-production metric. I need to be able to show them all of the metrics that we're actually using and explain those to them. And I need to be able to explain the incentives. So how do they earn additional money, and where is the funding coming from sometimes to make the payments to them? For instance, if we have contract metrics that are going to contribute X dollars to our plan collectively, then how do they need to contribute in order to make sure that we maximize our payment for those metrics? So some of the things that I try to always utilize with implementing new plans or modeling new plans are things like visual dashboard illustrating performance for the compensation plan metrics, trying to use graphs, using color-coded charts, using indicators that show movement up or down. I try to project period-end metrics based on where we are year-to-date, prior year sometimes, so that physicians have an idea of where they're headed. If they can see that their compensation is going to be down for this year, I want to show them that 6 months in advance so they have time to do something about it. I also try to allow the providers to determine how much change is required or what type of change. So for instance, that may be giving them options to change their scheduling utilization or being able to change the number of patients that they have enrolled in our care coordination program. I find that they are more compliant and much happier if they have input into how are they going to get their compensation where it's going to be, rather than me imposing something on them.
So maybe something like what you see on the screen right here would be a nice flexible tool to utilize with providers as well. This is something that can be created fairly simply just by even in a spreadsheet where you can put together the plan metrics that are there and the parameters for the organization there on the top. You can show pretty easily, here's the year-to-date productivity, and project out, here's where we think you're going to end the year based upon your historical amounts. And then we can show where they are with incentive pools and the clinic goals. Have they met their incentive? Where are areas where they're good? Where's areas that they need to work on that they're not meeting goal? And then from that, you can calculate it out. You can show the provider, based upon all of these metrics, here's what we anticipate your compensation in the next period or next year is going to be. Something like this, I think, is visual and can be provided to them on a fairly timely and easy basis. Is this something you think would be engaging with physicians?
Yes. I particularly like the little pie chart that shows them what percentage of the incentive is projected to be left on the table that they haven't earned yet. I like being able to put that type of positive incentive out in front of physicians.
Well, something like this, there's no reason why it has to be in some simple dashboard format. This is something that can be taken to the web, and you can see it has a little bit different layout, but it has all of the web interactivity that you saw on that other dashboard. It has the projected productivity, their year-to-date productivity. It has all of the plan parameters that are out there, and it shows them what they can expect to earn based upon their current productivity levels. They can slice and dice through it. They can apply the applicable filters that they're seeing, and it gives them, even if they wanted to, they could go through and individual providers could go through and look at, say, their projected RVUs and drill down or through to a more detailed level to get a more detailed analysis of what they're looking at. I think these web analytics really, again, can engage physicians, but it also provides it in an environment that gives them more functionality and interactivity with the users.
I think this visualization looks great, and I think any physician with about 30 seconds worth of explanation could follow this. I see that you've even been able to add some context there in terms of word descriptions of what some of the goals are, which is really great because usually you just see numbers. So the physicians, I think, would understand this readily. So I really like this to show to physicians, but how do I look at physicians across a department level if I want to see multiple physicians?
Well, I think that's what's great about the flexibility of these analytical tools that are out there, is that you can create a number of these different visualizations, and the power that exists in these analytical tools, again, to slice and dice and apply filters, is really some great functionality that's out there that, again, allows you to not just see the data, but also understand the data, really see what's driving things, to highlight these outliers that you're seeing. And here are our providers that are our highest productivity providers, but then you can identify right now and select which are the ones that aren't yet meeting their incentive goals. And it's a quick selection of just the individual data points that you're seeing that allows you to see which particular incentive goals they're not meeting, who are our lower RVU productivity providers, etc. I think the flexibility of these analytical tools can take this from an individual to a department level really fairly easily.
I see that. I see that as you're highlighting some of when you were looking at the high producers, and then also looking at those that hadn't met their incentive goals yet, that it actually brought up a list of the names so that I can see who those positions are and perhaps understand the circumstances behind it. So that looks like a great option for me. I guess the other thing I'd like to do is to be able to show the physician then how they can take this data and react to it. I've put together a simple dashboard based on the prior one that you had sent me to show an example of what I might like to develop. So this one, the two columns on the right are the dashboard, the simple dashboard that you showed before with all of the components still on it. But what I added was a little section I call quick answers that just quickly highlights red and green or yes and no, so that the physician in about 10 seconds can see, what do I need to work on? And then I followed that up by adding a section at the bottom called performance improvement. And this is where I put information that the physician can manipulate. So they may be able to change their schedule utilization or the number of hours that they want to be in the practice. They may be able to change their coding curves to improve their coding. So lots of options that we could put in this performance improvement section to let the physicians kind of guide how they want to change their practice based on the comp plan. So I think key concepts for changing compensation plans, if I were to try to implement something like this, some of the things that I need to do is to construct multiple examples and show how the comp plans are going to be changing compensation. One of the things that we also need to get out of comp are some of the other pieces of manual work that I have to do.
Yeah, so I know that talked about engaging with physicians with these reports, but there are other people who are very much invested in this that I think these reports and these analytical tools really bring a lot of value to, particularly payroll or budget offices that are trying to do cash flow projections, looking at bonus accruals in accounting and being able to take a little bit of the guesswork out of that, being able to give them some accuracy of what we're projecting to actually see there. I know a lot of people are very interested in being able to complete surveys for the different associations out there to make sure that their compensation is in scope with peers of their size and their scope, make sure that they're compensating their providers competitively. But really where I think these analytical tools come into play is when we are making changes to our compensation plan. We can take these tools and not just show what our current compensation model shows and not just do those calculations, but we can actually take and show what our future would be, because I know a lot of times providers are very, very concerned anytime we start talking about changing compensation.
I agree, Scott. There's a lot of angst out there right now about how are we going to get our MIPS data submitted. The physicians may have the quality data gathered up, but they're not sure how to transmit it, so that's potentially an IT issue. They're being told that they have to practice medicine in new ways to follow the protocols that are being developed for them, and causing a lot of unsettled physicians, especially around their compensation. So when we talk about changing comp plans, I always approach it in tiny little stair steps. I want to start with where we want to be and to be able to project the impact of changes on the physicians. But I generally do that by providing them multiple examples so that the governance committee can see the consequences of their choices. I don't want to leave them with just one choice. Also create visuals for the plan. Sometimes, always, a picture's worth 1,000 words. And so being able to look at some of these diagrams, some of these charts and graphs is very helpful. We also calculate multiple compensation plans and do comparisons, and we try to project the impact of behavior changes so that we don't undermine a plan. So, Scott, given all the things that we need to do, can you show me how we might go about projecting some of our future plans?
Yeah, so these analytical tools really do have a lot of power in that, and you can see an example right here where if you look at the blue section, that indicates what the current plan would be. And so that's showing where we are currently. The yellow sections then show the different or modified variables that may be involved in a new compensation plan, and be able to project out and show the changes that occur between the new compensation plan and the old compensation plan. Is this something that you think is useful for you?
Sure. Oh, okay. I could look at who's impacted the most, both positive and negative. So there's winners, and I bet you have losers in here too. I shouldn't call them losers, but definitely people who are losing compensation. Okay, that's very helpful in terms of understanding the impact at both the group level and the individual physician level, so that we can assist those physicians who are losing comp to compensate in some way for it, or to take actions with their practice. So yes, I do think that's very helpful. Now, what can we do with it? Because it's just a list at this point. I think I would turn this into a dashboard. And here's another sample that I did. I used the same simple dashboard that you had before on the two right-hand columns. I used the simple dashboard from before and put it in the current comp plan. And I reduced it down to just the essentials of what's your current comp. And then on the right-hand side, I used the data from the analytics worksheet that you just showed me to represent what would happen with the new comp plan. So in this case, I've listed the work RVUs by month, and I've added an indicator that shows which tier they're at, if we have a tiered plan. In this case, we do. I've added an estimate of the incentive pool comp, and I've added an estimate based on if we hit the clinic goals, what would that mean? And I pull that all together into a total compensation box, or in the center left, projecting what their annual comp would be with the same circumstances as today, but with comp divided up among different types of components or different pieces of the plan. And then I went back and used that little pie graph that you had before that showed how much of the possible comp have they earned and what's still outstanding, so that they can start to look forward and say, what do I need to do differently as we move into this new compensation plan? Again, trying to make sure that they're engaged in positive movement forward.
And I think this is really a very effective view, being able to view it side by side. I think a lot of times maybe some tools out there may get a little bit difficult to do that. So I'd like to just take one more quick survey, if we could, of the audience and understand. Would you mind sharing with your colleagues, if you do show proposed plans side by side, are you doing it on a single dashboard? Are you creating separate dashboards or reports to do it? Are you not currently doing that way? If we could just kind of gauge, it's really interesting, I think, for others to know kind of best practices of what people are currently doing with regard to communicating future comp plans.
I think this is one of the most complex pieces of implementing a new compensation plan, is this side-by-side comparison, but it's also one that can drive the most change.
Okay, well, it looks like most people aren't currently doing it, and that may be part of it may be a technology issue, it may be a time or resources issue, where the people are working so much on the current plan that they don't necessarily have the time or resources to do the other plans. Looks like others are doing on a single dashboard, similar to what we showed as well. So thank you for participating in this poll. It's good to see this information out there. Just a couple of recommendations for compensation management and really driving the change as we've discussed today. Analytics and reporting really is the key for this whole thing, and having good technological tools. Those have become more accessible and more cost effective in recent years, and really being able to utilize that technology for automation as well as for saving people time and effort that can be spent better in communicating and working with physicians to make sure everybody's a winner in all the compensation plans. Making sure that everything is calculated with no errors, that the data is delivered from a single source of truth, that we don't have differences in productivity measures, differences in collection figures, differences in quality figures coming from different places, that they're all done in one single place, that the metrics are all apples to apples across all providers and all specialties, and then allowing the physicians to be able to look at what really drives their personal compensation, letting them understand what they're doing well, where they're struggling, allowing them to modify their own behavior to maximize their own compensation, and letting them feel like they have control is something that's really going to drive down the resistance to change and allow you to align those incentives more along the lines with what you're seeing from the payers as these changes in the industry come around.
Scott, I don't think you can overemphasize the impact of compensation on the credibility of the organization. It only takes one or two mistakes in physician compensation with an unforgiving physician to spread through the rest of the organization in about 5 seconds. So when you talked about having a single point of truth or a single data set in order to create all of the information, I think that's just so important to the organization, as is the ability to produce consistent results that are error-free. So I think your points are right on.
Thank you, Becky. I know it showed in some of the poll questions that some of you may be struggling a little bit with this right now. Maybe there are other areas, whether it's quality, patient access, patient risk acuity scoring, revenue cycle management as well. PDS has core competencies in all of these. If you are struggling in any of these areas, please feel free to contact us or touch base, and we can set up a call and talk to you about how PDS can help you get to where you want to go. So with that, I want to thank you for your time and open it up to any questions that anyone may have. Okay, had a question come through real quick. What tools are you using to build the visualizations in this webinar? In this particular webinar, what you saw was the PDS Empower tool, which is powered by MicroStrategy, which is one of the key leading business intelligence visualization tools in the analytics industry today. A lot of the analytical tools that are out there can do similar things as what you saw today. Empower is just a tool that we have internally that we utilize to show this. Another question. How long does it take to model and publish compensation reports? In my mind, a lot of that's going to vary based upon the complexity of the calculations and where you pull data from. PDS has a tool called Dash that allows you to take data from disparate systems and integrate it into a single dashboard where those calculations can be automated. So a lot of times it may take a while depending upon the number of dashboards we're creating, but it's all automated. So I would say an analyst's time is only going to be spent a couple of hours in validation, verification, and distribution of the reports. So it doesn't have to take a long time, but the complexity will cause it to vary from one organization to the other. What are the biggest challenges you have seen with organizations rolling out new compensation plans? Becky, do you want to take this one?
Sure. I think the first thing is to establish the goals of what you're trying to accomplish with the comp plan. It usually has to flow from the top down based on contracts and organization goals. Beyond that, it's getting the data pieces that you need, whether it be statistics from the telephone system or risk scoring or quality metrics from the EMR. Just getting that data and being able to accumulate it readily is one of the biggest challenges. From there, we can model it rather readily. We can report on it. We can compile it so that you can manipulate it and analyze it. But getting that data in the first place is usually the biggest challenge.
Okay, thanks, Becky. I have a question. What relational database are you using? For this example, we use SQL Server. A lot of organizations can utilize just even Microsoft Access for smaller organizations. Others utilize SQL Server or Oracle. PDS has experience working with, really any of those, but a lot of those are really, most databases can be used and created relationally to do this. Another question, in your experience, is the calculation of compensation and reporting of compensation reported by the same team in the organization? For example, do you have compensation professionals versus finance versus IT?
Can I answer that one?
Please.
Yeah. So I have had many discussions with people from human resources and payroll over the years that everyone wants to be involved in calculating compensation. And then I show them the formulas. Understand that I come from a finance background, but I've spent many years working with physician organizations, and I understand billing and coding, and I understand productivity and risk scoring. And I show them the calculations, and we start talking about, okay, you need to calculate what the levels of compensation are, and you need to attach the conversion factors to those, and then we need to also bring in the impact of the risk score, and by that time they're lost because it is just such a foreign language. So I think you need dedicated people to do both the calculations and the distribution and explanation of the comp. It's just too complex. It is like someone trying to learn nursing compensation or nursing salaries. You have to understand all the ins and outs of it. And I've seen lots of organizations with dedicated people who are calculating nursing comp. And that's easier because it's usually input through some type of a timekeeping system that you can systematize. And we're not to that point yet with physician comp. It is still a lot of manual understanding of how to construct the plan. And then we automate it. So as you can tell, I have rather strong opinions about that.
Thanks, Becky. Another question, are you finding that organizations that use work RVUs as a component in their compensation models are adjusting the work RVU value based on modifiers such as reduced services or surgical assist? I've actually seen it both ways. Most of the time, in my experience, I've seen that they are reducing the RVU components when it comes through with those modifiers. The key to that is making sure that there's standard modifier reductions within the organization, because if you try to do it with what the payer is putting in place, those will a lot of times vary payer to payer. I don't know if you've seen similar things in your experience, Becky.
Absolutely. Just the treatment of multiple surgical procedures or bilateral procedures where sometimes the code includes the bilateral procedures. Sometimes you have to submit the information on 2 lines of the claim form. Sometimes it's on 1 line of the claim form with 1 unit of service. Sometimes it's 1 line on the claim form with multiple units of service and a modifier. There is just no standardization in the industry, and you have to be able to understand the payers to be able to build that into your RVU formulas. But it is important because if you have a lot of surgeons, especially if they're the major group of physicians that are impacted by using modifiers, if you are dealing with primary care physicians, the modifiers really don't make that much difference.
Thanks, Becky. Okay, well, I think we've gotten to all of the questions. I really appreciate your time today and hope that you found value in what we discussed. If there's anything you'd like to know further or any ways that you want to discuss, ways that maybe PDS can help you get to where you want to going, or if you have an additional question that pops up later on, please feel free to contact us. Our contact information is available on the screen. So thank you so much for your time today, and I hope you have a wonderful day.